Aashni is a full-stack engineer focusing on front-end on the Cache team. She works in JavaScript and Java on problems like internationalization, translations, and finding solutions for edge cases. She has also found a way to mix her two largest passions, technology and philanthropy, with her work at Elixir Labs, a nonprofit startup that empowers other nonprofits by building products for social good. Please welcome her for how to build inclusive products.
Thank you. So I always do an intro slide of like who I am, and then there's always some lovely person who introduces me and says all the things I want to say, so we'll get there. So I'm going to be talking about how to build inclusive products in the tech for good space. And like he did mention, my name is Aashni, and I work as an engineer at Square. I work on the Cache App team, which I will be talking about a little bit. I'm also the CEO of a nonprofit called Elixir Labs, which I absolutely love the work that I do there. And I previously worked at Microsoft, Amazon, and Owanda, if anyone knows anything about foreign currency trading. If you do, this is one of the platforms that happens on. I was born and I grew up in Kenya, which is in Eastern Africa, for anyone who didn't know that. And it sort of drives a lot of the things that I do in my life because, hey, I'm an Indian girl who grew up in Kenya and I now live in Canada. That's a lot of mixed things going on. And it gives me a really cool, diverse perspective when I come into trying to build products. I have 4 things that I like focusing my life on, at least right now. And that's when I'm not distracted by Netflix. And it's tech, philanthropy, travel, and photography. And the thing I love most about the work I get to do at both Square and Elixir Labs is it merges my love for tech and philanthropy because I get to work in the tech for good space. So, I'll talk a little bit about Square because it is related to some of the stuff we're doing later. Before I threw this up there, who knew what Square was? All right, my company will be super happy to hear that. It's my favorite way of describing it is, it's that swipey thing you have on your phone to accept credit cards. I'm sure there's a more official way to do it. One of the things that I love about the Square product is they started off simple and small with this small Square Reader device. And they've actually iterated over that, which is something we'll talk about later, and built up this entire dashboard system. And one of the things that they've done throughout this whole process of developing and building the more complicated dashboard is looked into how the customers that are using this, so the people who own the restaurants or the shops that you go to, how they interact with their customers and how they interact with their point of sale system. And it's not just a simple case of I'm going to have a laptop on my table because, hey, if you're working at a counter, you don't want to be crouched over like this for 8 hours. That's going to hurt your back and it's going to make you miserable. It's why they've designed a system where you've got one monitor at one level and you've got the payment part of it on a separate level so you can pass it around to the customer and make it easier for the customer to interact with. And that's some of the sort of inclusive design kind of things you want to do to make sure that everyone is able to use your products without any issues. So I don't work on any of that. I work on the Cache App. Who has heard of the Cache App? Yeah, I expected that. It's not currently available in Canada, which is why most of you haven't heard about it. It's a payment processing system, so think Interac e-transfers, except in the US they have nothing like it. So if you want to send someone money, you have to physically give them cash, at least like 5 years ago when we started. And this is sort of our solution for that. It started off as a pretty simple, like let's just send money tool, and it's grown as we've sort of seen how our users interact with our product. It's grown into this really cool tool where you can buy Bitcoin if that's your thing. Not my thing. Bitcoin scares me, but to each their own. You can also do things like get your own debit card, which is linked to a storage account you have. And when we're talking about creating an inclusive product, this debit card is awesome because for anyone who doesn't have a bank account before, they aren't able to get a debit card. But with the Cache App, you can now get one that's directly linked to your money and you can use that anywhere. So it gives people who previously couldn't afford bank accounts the ability to buy things online, which they couldn't before. Elixir Labs is, like I mentioned, a nonprofit. We partner with nonprofits around the world. We have 4 projects, or we have 2 current projects and 2 completed projects. And somehow they're actually in 4 different continents, which I think is fantastic. And we partner with them to try and figure out what they're doing to help the nonprofit space that they're working in and how we can make it a little better for them. And I'm going to be talking about one of those projects in a little bit. So, who thinks they know what exactly building an inclusive product entails? Don't all go putting your hands up at once. Go ahead in the back.
It means trying to basically make it so that for edge case at least that there isn't going to be, there's always space feedback, but there isn't so much of a limit on what you need.
Exactly. Anybody else? All right. So the Tech for Good space is essentially, inclusive design. Tech for Good is the next part. Inclusive design is, like you mentioned, trying to build a path forward for anyone who's trying to use your product, but also looking at aspects like, hey, the person that I want to use this, do they have any physical reasons that they might not be able to? Do they have any mental reasons that they might not be able to use our tool? So a physical reason might be, hey, if this app is for a mother, but she needs to use both her hands to use the app because, hey, it's a giant, like, max XS screen, and we've got buttons on both sides. If she's a new mother, she's holding a baby in her hand half the time. Do you think she's going to be able to navigate your app at the same time? Probably not. What about accessibility? Are the people that you're trying to get, or your customers, actually able to get the tech that they need to use your products? Removing biases like race, gender, and religion is another sort of really important part of inclusion, but I'm not going to dive too much into that today because that's like a 10-hour talk if I really wanted to do it properly. And then some of the cool things that I've learned recently, especially with the work I've been doing on the Cash App, is things like languages and currency. Usually when you're building the first iteration of your app, you're just going to build it in the language you speak most fluently, which is, I'm going to assume, English, but it could very well be a different language. But what happens when you try to port this app into a different country? Let's say China, where they have different characters, where the names are shorter, or Germany, where names are a lot longer sometimes. Or if you're going to an Arabic country where the language means you're reversing the text. How does your app work in those environments? And it's not something you need to think about on day one of creating your product, because you'll never finish your product if you are, but these are things that you want to make sure you're sort of creating the opportunity for you to build that easily in the future. All right, so another question for you guys. What is tech for good? All right, I'm not getting a lot of answers here, am I? Go ahead.
Technology would cause this social impact?
Yeah. So the idea with Tech for Good is you want to build things that help the world in some way. So part of it could be a tool like Facebook Messenger that lets you communicate with people. That is Tech for Good. It might be used in ways that aren't good, such as bullying, but that wasn't the intent around the product. And ideally, you're trying to build ways to block stuff like that. Other examples of this are working with nonprofits and trying to build tech solutions for things that they're working on as well. So, why don't we use tech to solve all of our problems? Because it's hard. And sometimes tech isn't actually the right solution for the problem that you want to work on. So think about the last time that you had a problem. It's, 3 o'clock right now, so you had lunch a few hours ago. Is anyone feeling a little peckish, though? Feeling a little hungry? Yeah? Yeah? Well, if the slides work properly, there we go. If you're feeling hungry and I recently found out Uber Eats works here now, so the slide works. You could literally go onto your phone and within 2 minutes, you could order food to get here in the next 30 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic and rain conditions, apparently. And that's pretty fantastic, because your problem is that you're feeling hungry and you want to get food. And this is a technical solution to fix that. In a similar way, do you need a ride? Now this one, please don't hate me. I come from Toronto and I forgot that Vancouver doesn't have Uber yet or Lyft. I found this out the hard way on Thursday when I stood in the rain for an hour waiting for a cab. That wasn't fun. But that is a problem, and there are solutions for it, and hopefully we can make it work for us. The final one is need directions. So you've got Google Maps, you've got Apple Maps, which may have had its flaws in the past. You have Bing Maps. My personal favorite is Waze if I'm driving around, because it's so good. It just works. It saved me hours of time in traffic. And keeping in touch with friends. It's free. It's great because it's free. And keeping in touch with friends. I'm sure you have at least one of these. If not, That's totally okay. You're probably more likely to have multiple of these, and I do. Things like Facebook, Snapchat. There's probably a bunch of things or a bunch of tools that you use today that aren't even on this anymore because this is old. But these are all tools that technically are in the tech for good space because they're trying to solve problems that we have. So what makes these apps, in your opinion, easy to use? Oof. It's going to be a long session, isn't it? All right. They're simple. Convenient, easy to use, easy to access. Usually. It's rare for them to crash. Go ahead.
Low barrier to entry, so you don't need an expensive phone, you don't need some skills in order to get, you don't need to pay money in order to get it.
For most of these, yeah. You do need to pay for services and things like Uber Eats, but you're right. There's super low barrier to entry. Do you notice any patterns with these apps? You kind of did because you mentioned a bunch of them. But these are some of the issues with it. These apps require you to have a smartphone, right? Or a browser or a computer to go with the browser. These apps also require an internet connection of some kind so that you can use them. And they also, for the ones that require payments, need a credit card or a Visa, like a debit card. And those aren't really good, solid, viable options when you're looking at other countries like Kenya. So I'm going to switch things up a little bit. Let's think about a health app instead. Let's say you want to remember to take your medication because, hey, you had a surgery and you need to just make sure you're not going to get worse. Might be simple medication, might be something that you're taking once a day, and really a reminder on your phone is probably going to be sufficient for that. But what if it's more complicated than that? What if you're an elderly patient, like your grandmother, for example, who isn't so familiar with how to use a smartphone, but you've got about 3 or 4 different types of medication. She has to take 2 with her breakfast, she has to take 3 of them at lunchtime, another 2 at tea time, and then 3 before she goes to bed. That starts getting more and more complicated. You could build these things out in an app, but how likely is it that your grandma is going to be able to use an app like that? Especially if she has some diseases like Parkinson's where it's hard for her to use a phone, right? I hope you're starting to see the direction that I'm going with this, like the kind of problems that we're facing when we are trying to build apps in the tech for good space. Because one of the really tough things in the tech for good space is you're creating technology for people who aren't sort of, ooh, I don't want to use the word normal. That's a horrible word to use here. They are often a minority group. They're often with a disability of some kind. Or sometimes they just don't live in a North American country where there's easy access to internet, or a European country, or first world countries, maybe a better way to phrase that. And so when you try to build an app or a tool, it doesn't have to be something you want to build for a country like Kenya. It could be an app that you want to build for yourself. But when you try to expand that out and look at some of the people it could help, have you answered these questions about it? So I'm going to introduce a quick project to you that I worked on a few years ago, I think like 3 years ago, called Good Vibes. The basic idea behind the project is it was to help patients with schizophrenia. So the patient here is our wonderful, dashing college clerk in the middle, and unfortunately he has schizophrenia. And who is familiar with schizophrenia? So you kind of have an idea. Okay, so for anyone who didn't raise their hands, some of the side effects of schizophrenia, or some of the ways that it manifests is you have paranoia, you're not really able to speak coherently, you're usually not sleeping, it's hard to be social with other people, it's hard to get along with other people as well. So let's say that college clerk is able to go and talk to Dr. Bruce, and Dr. Bruce is helping him out. I totally stole these slides from the university project that I did this for, so like these are really old slides. But yeah, you're talking to Dr. Bruce, and Dr. Bruce says, hey, you know what, let's use this app or this technology to try and keep track of you. So he's going to be collecting data on college Clark to make sure that Clark is taking his medication. And one of the things that we built into our system is we're going to make Clark speak into the phone for a minute every day and just convert what he says into text, and then analyze that text to see how coherent it is and compare it to previous days that he's been talking. And we can start noticing a trend. Is he staying stable, or does he suddenly take a dip? And if he's taking a dip, is that a sign that he's starting to go into an episode again and we need to go and help him? Because usually the amount of time that a patient spends with a doctor is not enough for a doctor to know. And the gaps between when a patient sees a doctor is when a patient is often going to get worse. The other part of the app that we built was the wonderful Mama Mary, who is smiling, and all of the friends in the background. So that turned into the social network, or the third-party network of people to help their app, or to help Clark get better. And the way that we integrated the app with them is they can actually provide feedback to the doctor on how College Clark is doing. So what's his appearance like? Have you actually met him in the last 2 weeks? Did you plan to meet and he keeps on canceling because he's avoiding you? Has he showered? Has he washed his clothes? Now, it doesn't go into those specific details, but it does go into a sort of rating kind of a thing of like, is his behavior normal as what you expect it to be, or is he suddenly dropping? And we built some systems and alarms into our product where if all of his signals start going super negative, the doctor would be notified and the people in his support network would be notified and they can go and check in on him. Sounds like a pretty cool system, right? I was pretty happy with it. I talked about all of this. Sounds pretty good, right? Except not quite. So for the people who raise their hands because they know a little bit about schizophrenia, do you know why this might not be the best solution? Before I go on to my next slide and give you the answer. Go ahead.
Depending on them the client using it, how they're actually inputting the data.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
If he's in an episode or something like
Yes.
that, he won't be able to use it.
Yes. I think you're raising your hand.
I think it's going to make them more paranoid. I mean, it's going to think everyone's judging him and rating him on an app when he's already dealing with paranoia. I don't think that's...
Yep. And actually, it's great that anybody else, before I go on to my next slide, I think you were, nope. Okay, yeah. You touched on paranoia, which is one of the other things I have. If you're telling a paranoid person to talk into a system because you want to analyze what they're saying, I'm pretty sure they're not going to do that. I mean, hey, if you can figure out how to get them to do it, great. Some of the other issues are, this is a statistic I found in the US, but 42 patients with schizophrenia don't actually have a stable home. And the implications of that, I think it was 25% are homeless. The implications of that are they're most likely poor. They most likely don't have access to a smartphone. They most likely can't afford a phone plan, even if they do have a smartphone. And all of this stuff that we're trying to build to help them, kaput, doesn't help them at all. And then the other part of it is many patients don't actually get the treatment that they need or can't afford the treatment that they need. Or because of how health systems work, unfortunately, we don't have enough psychiatrists to work with those patients. Which means while the solution looks good on paper, it's not actually going to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. So that concept of there might be an app for that, which is a huge saying 5 years ago, back when I was a student, it's not always the right app. And that's one of the things that we're trying to deal with when it comes to the tech for good space. So I gave a little bit of a hint at this earlier. What about the rest of the world? When you're talking about countries like India or Kenya, where smartphones are there, and they definitely exist, but they only really exist with the middle class or upper class, and not the lower class who make up the majority of the population. The apps and tools that you're building, like Kenya has Uber, and it works phenomenally well. They've had to make some adjustments on the payment system, which we'll get into later. But Uber is not something that everybody's going to be using. It's only, again, the upper class and the people who afford the smartphones who can book the Uber. So I'm going to introduce the Pangaea Network. Pangaea Network is one of the projects that I'm currently working on with Elixir Labs, which when I say it's current, I mean we haven't finished making our product. We've got lots of it done and we're really excited to launch it. But this is sort of the way that we've worked through the process of figuring out what it is we need to build. So a really brief overview of the project is this nonprofit works, they're based out of Texas, but they work with groups of communities, groups of women in Kenya. So this is your lovely group of women. They're usually about 20 or 30 in a group. And they spend 6 months giving these women education on things like health and human rights and, hey, this is maybe a good way to run a business, or here's some basic finance and accounting things that you should probably know if you want to have a successful business, even if a successful business to them is really just having a shack or a little stand on the side of the road where they're selling fruits, because that to them is their income and it works perfectly well for what they need. After that, they have their business that they've created and they're working on. They have access to money from the nonprofit, and they're given a loan so that they can use that money to go and expand their business. It might be getting a car or something like that to help with the transportation. It might be providing them resources to get an additional item to sell on their stand. And the big idea behind it is you can actually grow the community like this. Because if the women are starting to be successful, they can pass that on to their kids. They can pass on that wealth and give their children the opportunity to have a stable home where the kids don't actually have to stay home to work, they can go to school. These women can also throw that back to the community and help other women, and it's just a really good positive reinforcement cycle. Which means, yay, that's awesome. Surely we can find a way to help them with tech, right? Any suggestions? I'll go back to this slide so you can look at it a little more. I'm loving that you're actually paying attention to this. Go ahead.
I use like Kiva for micro loans, so that's technically.
Yeah. Yes. So you're talking about replacing the loan system that they have with something like Kiva?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I say that they have loans from here, it's slightly different to what your average loan is, and they're not actually called loans. They're called something else. And this nonprofit doesn't want to shift that model, because the way it works is this group of women are given, let's say, the equivalent of $3,000 in the local Kenyan currency. And the group of women are then sort of given the option, or given an application they can fill out to say, hey, this is what my business is currently doing. These are the savings that I have to help the business. And I would like, $100 to go and buy the cart. And the group of women actually decide what the interest rate is on what they have to pay back at the end. And the really cool thing about the way they've set it up is the nonprofit actually goes and checks in on them once a month to make sure you're doing okay and your business is running the way you expect it to. But they also, when they set this interest rate, it's the group that has to pay them back, not the specific woman. And the importance around that is, what happens if the woman has a big setback in her family? There was crazy weather and all the crops got destroyed. Or one of her children or her husband is dead, right? That will really set them back. And we're not talking like crazy profit margins. And I'm seeing your facial reactions right now. These are things that happen constantly for them. And so
it just seems like maybe we should solve the problem, like that bigger problem, before we introduce tax, right? Like maybe we should figure out how we can not have their husbands die. Do you want Wi-Fi?
if you can figure out how to be God, that would be amazing. But you're touching on the point right now, right? It's like, and you're actually hitting the nail on the head. This is not what we want to change, right? So the thing that anybody else want to go? I think I kind of told you that anything you say is going to be wrong anyway. So I'm just going to keep going. Before I get to what we are doing, you want to identify problem areas that you can improve. So what I showed you was totally to set you up for failure, and I love it. It's more, you want to look at the problem, and then you want to start asking questions and figure out more about how it works. So I've spent quite a long time talking to the people who run this nonprofit, and I was trying to identify, okay, so you have this, and this all works well, and I personally don't want to change any of this, because when they went in, this is a model that those women were already doing. They didn't have access to the $3,000, but they did have a pool of money that they, as a group of women, would collect, and each month they would give some portion of that to the woman who needed it the most in the community. And you don't want to change something like that, because that's true and organic, and that's how this community stays together. Instead, we found out about this awesome thing that we can help with instead. So with loans, you want to probably, if you're a smart nonprofit, have some sort of accounting system set up, a way to track and make sure that people are paying their loans back on time, especially when it is over a year or a year and a half. So we asked them about it. This is not a real picture. This is a picture I found on Google, but it has numbers on it. So imagine that this. So they would go and manually write down into a physical book who has paid and what amount that they have paid towards the loan that they need to repay. And then, the hardest and scariest part for me, they would send that by a bus from the rural parts of Kenya that they live in to the city center. I am shocked, and she was also shocked that they have not lost any of these books yet. And then that book would get sent to the city center. The nonprofit base out of the city center would manually input all of this data into their system and try to see or make sure that there are no issues. Who has ever manually inputted a bunch of data, especially numbers? How accurate are you at doing it? So you can imagine the kind of problems that arise here and the amount of time that's being wasted because you have to wait for the book to be sent and sent back. You have to manually input everything. It's a lot of wasted resources, right? So this is my face. Any suggestions with this? This being sort of the direction that I want to take this in. Not saying that trying to change up the loan systems and stuff aren't an option as well, but let's stick with this route. Yes, that's a great question. So the base has internet access and they have laptops, and they're in the Nairobi city center, which is a pretty developed country. Something I know, very developed city. Something I know because I live there.
That's the base though, not the villages?
So yeah, so the base, which is where they go and analyze all of the data, is in Nairobi city center.
Wi-Fi, but the places they
Yes.
actually live.
Yeah, but these places are like, think about where the, what's the right word to call them? Indians live? The Native Americans or Native Indians. Think about like how they live pretty remotely. And I don't know too much about them, but I believe a lot of them don't actually have internet connections and things like that. So it's sort of a similar translation to where these groups of people live in Kenya. Like it sometimes takes them like 5 hours just to walk to the bus station to drop off the book to be sent.
Is there any
Sorry.
sort of mail service basically in these villages? Or
Sorry, is there any sort of what?
Oh, mail service.
This is the mail service. Sorry, you were waiting for a question, then I'll come back to you.
Do they have calculators?
The base or the women?
Women.
It's a great question. I actually don't know. But I will counter that with a point that I was trying to hide for later.
Ticker tapes?
Well, I was going to say that a lot of these women are actually illiterate. So whether they all have calculators or not, it makes it a hard problem. Like they probably still may or may not be able to. And it's part of why that educational 6 months is so important, because they can teach them some of these base things that they need to know.
Do people do like send SMS messages or have send self-service?
Ooh, did I tell you some of this earlier? Yeah.
If they're illiterate, they can't send us text messages, right?
Well, that's part of what we have to build into the system, right? All right, so I'm going to head on to the next part, which isn't quite hitting the solution yet, but just building onto some of the things that we've had to think about. Do your research, right? You want to figure out what technologies are successful in the area and why. And one of the things that I love about Kenya is they've actually created this system where if I need to send somebody money, I can actually just do that essentially like a text message, which is quite phenomenal when you're thinking about a country like the US where the banks can't actually even talk to each other. So I didn't say that too loudly. And it originally started with, and I may slip into some local Kenyan slang here, so sorry. But the way it started is, in Kenya, our phone plans aren't actually, like pay $50 and you'll have internet for a month and you'll cry at the end when you see the phone bill and it's really $300. In Kenya, you pay for the minutes sort of upfront instead, and it's more of a pay-as-you-go plan. But it's also ridiculously cheaper compared to here. And one of the things that kept happening is if, let's say, you wanted to call me, but you were out of credit, I could literally send you credit from my account to you, and then you could use that to top yourself up. And we would, and we would call that the Kenyan way is like sijui tafadhali saidia credo, where credo is like credit and stuff. And my sister was like notoriously good at just constantly needing credit from me. And I go back, and every now and then I go back, and I'm like, hey, you were supposed to call me. She's like, yeah, I didn't have credit. I'm like, but you're a grown up now. That shouldn't be an issue anymore. I hope she doesn't watch this video. So that sort of started off, and then one of the cell phone company providers, Safaricom, turned that into an actual model where it's not quite an SMS, but it's more a phone platform system. You can, kind of like how you dial *399 or something like that. You do the same thing in Kenya, but it gives you the option to transfer money from your credit balance to somebody else's credit balance. And they've made that system bigger and better, where it actually takes money straight out of your bank account instead and sends it to somebody else's bank account or their credit balance, however you set it up. And it works so efficiently that the biggest supermarkets accept credit this way, or accept payment this way. Most of the shops accept payment this way. And it's like, it hurts your company now to not accept payment this way. The other thing that the other really cool thing about this is, and it's not related to the Pangaea Network project, is this has sort of circumvented the whole issue of, hey, we don't have credit cards in Kenya. Like, we have credit cards, but not many people use them. That's, again, restricted for the upper class people who can afford to have really good bank accounts, that can afford, yeah, I talk a lot about banks apparently. But this whole credit system, like, please go check it out. It's honestly one of the most fascinating pieces of tech, in my opinion. It's the most popular one is, oh my God, I've forgotten its name. We will get back to that at some point. But it's just such a cool piece of technology. And yeah, so you want to talk to the people, going back to the Pangaea Network and away from my love for this text message-based credit system, you want to talk to the people that you're helping. You want to figure out, okay, do you want me to change up your loan system? No. What else do you do with your product? Oh, you send your book by bus? Are you crazy? And that only happens when you're talking to the people that you're trying to help. Look at the tech patterns and behaviors in the area. We talked quite extensively about this. So the SMS money transfer system is a huge, huge bonus. And look at what kind of, again, talked about this at depth. Just going to move on. And so these are some of the information that I was holding out on you earlier, because you need to do your research. So I've done the research for you. These communities are, like I mentioned, in rural Kenya. It is extremely unlikely that they have any sort of data plan. They're unlikely to have smartphones or computers, except for the hub in Nairobi. And then you've got other communication barriers where the women outside in the communities are illiterate. Some of them, not all. And some of them actually speak different languages between the different communities that we have, depending on which area they're in. So that kind of goes back to that thing I talked about earlier about how are you going to build Russian and Chinese into your system when we're starting off with a much smaller case of we're in the same country, how do we make sure everyone in the country can access it too? So the other thing that I want to talk about is you want to build and iterate, which is a step that we're currently on, where you want to get a minimum viable product working, and then figure out what's good about it, figure out what's bad about it. Listen to the customers, listen to the people who are using your product, take their feedback, figure out what you need to do to get to that next step, and iterate, and then do that over and over again. That's what we've been doing at Square for years. I can't take any credit for that because I've only been there for a short time, but they've been doing that, and that's how they went from that tiny little device that you plug into the headphone jack if you don't have a new iPhone. And we now have these stands, which are beautiful, and they work with pretty much every device. So, do you have any suggestions now about the kind of tool that we want to build? You're itching to go.
Emojis.
I heard you say that earlier. How would you like to use emojis to solve this, other than having that face?
3 fish.
Oh, as a, like, I bought 3 fish? But that's for, like, buying things. This is more just keeping track that you've paid your loans.
I sold 3 fish.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That could be an interesting way. So building up an accounting system for each woman.
Yeah, and you could teach them like basic numbers, and then use images.
But do old school like Nokia 3210s have emojis? I'm asking you. I don't think they do.
I don't know how to do that.
All right, aging me quite a bit here, are you? I only graduated a little bit ago. Oh wow, yeah, because Nokias aren't really a thing anymore, are they? So our solution is, just trying to figure out what my next slide is. All right. So our solution is we're actually building a text-based reporting system for them, where we've got essentially two different customers we're looking at. One is the group of women that are out in the rural parts of Kenya, and the other is the local admin. Because anything that these women do, you don't want to be the local admin person who has to read that on a phone. Like, could you imagine getting like 50 text messages being like, hey, I've got 50 bob I paid 50 bob back towards the loan. It's like, well, there's 500 of those. I'm not going through that. Because you still go back to that whole manual process. So what we're doing is, just checking on the time. All right, we're good. What we're doing is you have the women in the community. The first sort of iteration of this is they could text in anytime they repay a loan. And that would automatically get picked up by our servers, stored in a database. And as soon as you have any information stored in a database, it's super easy to like manipulate and figure out and like do calculations like, hey, they owe $100 and they paid back $20. How much do they owe? Quick math, right? Once you have it sort of in a computer system like that, it's really easy to do these things, which these women at the headquarters don't have to do anymore. So the way that we're dealing with the women at the headquarters is we're building an entire web-based admin dashboard for them, where they can go and create new communities, add new community members, set some of the requirements that they have, like these women have to finish the 6 months of training before they can loan any money, and things like that. Do you have a question?
Where are they getting this loan from?
The nonprofit gets money.
Oh, and it's loaning them to them.
Yeah.
It's a nonprofit.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the nonprofit has the money to start off with, and then once the group of women have finished the training, they'll essentially say, hey, from what I remember, the group of women and the nonprofit open up essentially a joint bank account, so that and then each group of women has a leadership. So there's like 3 women who are essentially in charge, and you have to have 1 woman from the leadership and 1 woman from the nonprofit sign off before any money can be taken out of the bank account. And this is just some of like the safeguard ways of making sure no one's misusing that money.
It just seems like we're doing 2 things, right? Like they're texting that they're repaying and they're repaying. Isn't the data that they're repaying already being sent and they repay it? Like why would they have to text?
Oh, sorry.
You know
Okay,
what
I see your confusion.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
isn't it common, like there's a bank transaction saying that $20 has been added to the,
Yeah. Okay, I glossed over that. So the whole text message-based system is not, some of these women use it, but not everyone. So just assume, like, that's a really cool tech that works in Kenya, but we're not using it in this example because a lot of women will just pay, like, physical cash back instead. Yeah, sorry, I see how that was confusing. Yeah, ideally, we could integrate with them, and I believe they've got an API. That's like iteration 3 or 4, where we can integrate with them. We just need to make sure, again, being inclusive for anyone who doesn't have M-Pesa, that's what it's called, M-Pesa. For anyone who doesn't have it, that we have a fallback system for them as well. So I mentioned that the first iteration of this is we'd have each woman in the community send that text message, right?
So,
But-
sorry, just one more. How do they get the cash from them to you guys? On the bus, like with the book? Or like
No, so they've got a bank account that's close to their city.
okay.
It might not be in their, because they're living in a village. They've probably got a town relatively close by, or they've got the phone system, like they can take money out of the bank account from their phone and do it that way. It just depends on where they are and how their group works. Yeah. Any more questions, or should I go on to the next part? Feel free to keep asking questions.
Yeah, is that okay? Okay, so if they
Well, it depends on how bored they get.
if they have their own bank account in the city, right? So it's like in the system, like there's a database with their bank account. Why can't they just send it from their bank account in the database to you guys' bank account?
So you've got the nonprofit HQ,
Yeah.
and they control the they basically sit on all the money. And then the nonprofit HQ will open a community bank account with that community group.
Oh,
So it's
but
a
can't they just deposit the money and then you see that they put the money into the
but you won't know which woman deposited that money in because it's a community account.
That's what I'm confused.
Yeah.
I thought they're like as a whole.
Each person, no.
Getting the money. No.
No. So it's like the community account is putting it in. So the HQ can say, hey, you know how you've reported that you've returned $4,000 or $3,000? We only see 2,000 in the bank. Something's missing or something's not quite right. So they can do that. And I think that's what you're touching
How
on.
many women are there?
There's usually 20 to 30 women
Why
per
can't they just
community.
have their own account then and then it's all tracked? Instead of like, oh, it's a group, but not really.
Because there's a lot of requirements and restrictions they have around who can actually get the loan. Because like one of the requirements that they have, which I didn't even go into with this, is in order to get a loan, you have to have a savings account as well, which you're constantly adding money to, so that we know that your business is making sort of enough money. And then that savings account kind of works as in case you can't repay your loan, we can take some of the savings as a backup system. And it's not that they expect that savings account to cover the whole loan amount, but it's a way to encourage the women to say, hey, you need to make sure you're doing a certain amount of saving. You need to make sure you're making smart decisions with your business. And they're not just telling these women, hey, you need to do this, and not giving them any sort of support after that. They actually have someone once a month going and checking in and being like, hey, you were supposed to hit this requirement and you haven't. What's going on? Oh, your child unfortunately died. Okay, let's figure something like that out. Or you were supposed to do this and you missed it. What can we do to make sure next month you're able to hit it? Go ahead.
That thought would be on an individual level and not on a community
Yes, that would be on a very individual level because, again, money is always a very private thing.
level. So then, is it the nonprofit that's managing the personnel within the village then?
When you say personnel within the village, do you mean the people who are
Like
being...
women, like let's say for example, one or a group of women aren't meeting their quota. Then do you guys then come once a month to say like, hey guys, like you need to fix this, otherwise in the upcoming month maybe you guys won't be a part of this anymore? Like,
Something like that. So the nonprofit HQ has a group of people that they send out. They're called, I always forget what they're called. We're just going to call them Bobs because I have no idea what they're called right now. They have a group of people that they send out to all of these different communities once a month. And these people go and say, hey, let's just do a quick manual check. And there's actually this like really massive like 6-page form that they have to fill out with things like attendance. So who actually showed up to this meeting? If they didn't show up, why? Is it because they're ill or they're like hiding from us because they can't repay the loan, or is something else going on? Or maybe they just went to the village next door and are visiting a family and there's nothing wrong. And from what I remember with that system, they would go and manually fill all of this out and then go to a nearby village where they can try and get an internet connection because this Bob person has a computer. And then they would go and fill out this document online, or basically just type it up if they didn't type it up already, and email that to the HQ. And then the next day the HQ will review it and they'll be like, okay, these numbers don't add up here, this doesn't add up, maybe follow up with this person because they keep giving excuses. And then a day after that, that person goes back to that village and has those follow-up conversations. So there's like a lot of subtle nuances that you don't find out until you talk to the nonprofit and talk to the people who are on the ground about these things. Yeah. Any other questions? I forgot what I was talking about anyway, so. Okay, so I think I mentioned that the first iteration of this is we're gonna have each woman message. But let's say that I'm an honest person, normally, and I'm paying back. Usually I manage to sort of keep the amount, or like the minimum that I need to pay back to meet my loan repayment amount at the end. Maybe one month I just had something go on, like my crops just didn't grow very well or something like that. And I don't want to seem like the bad person. So I'm gonna just say that I sent in, or like I submitted the same amount of money that everybody else did, or that I need to, even though I haven't. Because remember, like these women are meeting in a group, putting the money in a pot, basically, or like to a single person, and then that money would get deposited back into the bank if it's not being reloaned out, right? So how do you stop me from saying that I sent in $20 when I only sent in $5? Any guesses? Go ahead.
Have one person offer to verify, or?
Something like that. So my like version of this is like, I think of 2FA. So you have, I mentioned that we've got the leadership group. We can have the assumption that the leadership group are literate. And this also ties into the whole literacy issue as well, where let's say out of the 30 women we have 3 women who are the leadership and who are illiterate. We can set special accounts for them where they're allowed to report in saying, hey, you have sent in $50. And then you can get either a confirmation text or a call saying, hey, can you confirm that you have submitted $50? And you can say yes if it's a text message, or going back to this illiteracy thing, if you see, you can get a call and it's in your language. And you can just say yes or no in the local language there. And that's how that sort of authentication system works. And that's the direction that we're going into. There's a lot of other things that we would like to build once we start getting a couple more iterations out and we start seeing how they're actually interacting with this.
I think what I don't understand is like, why do you even need to ask them? Like the money's either there or not. Like it's either in the bank or it's not, right? Like I don't get, like if you have one person checking with each person, like they have a pot, like you need to all put in 15, someone put in 5. Like it's just like, you write down this person put in pocket only, right? And like, why do you need to call them to ask them? Like, you already know it doesn't add up, right? Like, do you just like, do you see it doesn't add up and then you call them to wonder what's going on?
So I don't think that they've had too many of these issues in the past because they have that system where you see and you actually sign the paperwork saying, I've paid the $5. But if we swap over to another system where everyone can just text in how much they've repaid and there's no verification system, you're introducing a new problem that you didn't have before, and people could take advantage of it. Again, we hope nobody does because it's not nice.
Well, it's a non-profit, right? Like you're just trying to help.
Yeah. Well, it's also not the non-profit. It's the group of women who, like, if money is missing, the entire group of women have to cover that cost.
That's actually a really good way to like keep everyone in check, right? Like it's social.
It's because you're accountable for your neighbors, just like. And so one thing I mentioned earlier, but I didn't dive into too much, is the reason that this works so well is this was something that started off as an organic thing. Before this nonprofit even came into the picture, these groups of women were forming naturally, where you'd get 20 or 30 women in a community, sit around once a month, they'd put 20 bob into the pool, and then they'd say, hey, you have had a rough month, here is money for you. And there's no requirements. There's no expectation that this money is coming back. It's just everyone is helping everyone out. And then this nonprofit saw that model, and they're like, hey, what happens if we can increase the amount of money that these women are getting? Instead of just helping them solve that one issue, we could help them grow their businesses so that they can make their community more stable. And they can make their, when they're making their community more stable, they're making all of their lives much better. So, that's our version of the solution so far. I hope I told you all the different parts of it because it got pretty broken up there. But my next slide, which you're gonna love, is questions. Feel free to ask about like the Pangaea Network project, any of the other projects that we're working on, the Good Vibes project that I talked about earlier. Granted, that was like a university final year project that like died as soon as I graduated. Go ahead.
So it seems like you're trying to work your way around the whole illiteracy thing, but wouldn't it be more beneficial in the long run if we just sent them an educator like once a week, or get the leading women in the villages that are already capable to then transfer?
Okay, so my responses to that, and I don't work with a nonprofit, I'm just trying to help build solutions for them, so this may or may not be their answer. Your first idea is to send someone to teach them English, right? That requires money to pay a teacher. That requires time from all of the different people who want to come and learn English. And that time is really valuable for these women because they need to be out during the day, like either growing their crops or fishing or whatever it is, or like making their clothes and selling it. So it's really hard for them to do that, especially when literacy is not the biggest thing for them. They often care more about making sure their kids are going to school so that they don't have the same issue. The second one is talking about having the 3 women, or like whoever is literate, teaching everyone else. That goes into the same group of, hey, since you're doing good at this, can you spend all of your free time teaching other people to do it? While in theory that's great, it kind of doesn't always work out because you now have someone who's essentially doing work, taking time away from their own jobs, essentially losing money that they can't afford to lose, and it becomes very hard.
But wasn't that the model that they were following here, take this money.
Well, it's different between giving someone money and giving someone time, right? So like one of the things I used to, this is like way, way, way back, but not that long ago, where like Nokia's existed. This is like when I was in high school. I used to be part of this high school club, I guess, where we would fundraise money, and then we would take 20,000 shillings, which is about $2,000, once a month to this community that on Sundays, every single Sunday, including like Christmas, New Year, like holidays, they would go and feed 2,000 children from the slums. And it's one thing to just give them money, but to actually go there and be part of that whole process is like mind-blowing. But the thing that they needed help with, because they had a steady source of income coming, they had loads of people donating to their charity, so that they never really were worried about the money. What they needed help with is people on the ground to actually go and deliver the food, or like share out the food, make sure that the kids are going through the lines, make sure that we have just enough left so that the last child in the queue actually gets something to eat instead of finishing on the 20th child or something. And so it's that question of like giving money versus giving time. It's really easy for people to give money. It's a lot harder for someone to give time. I'm gonna go with you because I saw your hand up earlier, and then I'll come back to you.
What about like putting TVs up?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What about putting TVs up with instructional videos?
Sounds like a great idea. Do you want to hook up the internet or the electricity and all of that as well? and I guess you don't need that, but they may or may not have electricity out there, and it's extremely it's extremely expensive. Yeah, it's one of these things where like we could think of a really quick and easy solution for ourselves because we know how we live and we know what we have access to. But going back to one of my first slides, it's like, what do they have access to when you're trying to build this for them? Do you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, when you're making these different iterations, are you testing with those people in remote community villages, or are you testing within?
We're currently testing within our community just because we want to make sure we've got a sort of viable version that we can send out to them. And then once we've got a viable version we can send out to them, we're going to start, we'll get their feedback. Each community is sort of a one-year cycle, so it's really like we're going to give a version to one community, we'll get their feedback, and then we'll iterate it for the next round. Just because changing some of these models halfway through may or may not work very well. I think you had a question in the back.
Just sort of curious about sort of linking this a bit more to foreign financial institutions. So we're taking records based on people's payments, and over a long time that actually might be enough to, like let's say they might want to get a larger loan, they could do it through an actual sort of bank if there's any. Like, is the current sort of accounting at all being used in that way? So somebody might be able to develop a profile so that they could get their loans independent carry?
That's actually a really interesting question, and I honestly have no idea. I'm going to assume probably not, just because even though they are going for a bigger loan, those are still probably going to be considered small loans that the bank wouldn't want to accept, but I could be completely wrong. This is coming more from my knowledge at Square, where Square offers like small loans to small businesses who, like let's say you're a hairdresser, you need $500 to buy a new hairdryer or something. We'll give you a loan for that, and we've got a really great payment system, but a bank won't do that for you. Yeah, but it's a great question and something I'm actually going to recommend to them if they can build this profile, and maybe it'll help them in a year or two. Did someone on this side have a question? No? I thought I saw a hand go up. It's totally fine if you don't.
There was one question from the internet.
Sure.
Can I
The internet is scary.
my design or development skills to the project?
Absolutely, to Elixir Labs or Pangaea, well, either way. Feel free to email me. My email is craftily at the bottom of this. No, it's not. My Twitter handle is at the bottom of this. But yeah, we're always looking for more people. This is one of our projects. One of our other projects is trying to combat slavery by creating a tool to make you more aware about the kind of products you're buying and if they are known to be slave trade free or not. So that's another really interesting product. And we're always looking for more. So if you know about a nonprofit that needs some technical help, let me know too. This was not planned to be an Elixir Labs or Square pitch, but I love working at both of them.
Someone clearly is interested.
Absolutely. I think I'm out of time. But if you do have any other questions, I will stick around for a few minutes. Thank you all for coming.